Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to You're A Goddamn Cheetah with me, Jenna, a Scorpio moon coach. How are you doing? How is your summer? How's your summer holidays going? Actually, the first thing I want to say is today's episode has a bit of a trigger warning about it. So we're going to be talking a bit about eating disorders today. So if that is triggering in any way, shape or form, and it's not something that you're ready to listen to right now, please just turn off right now and know that come back to it when you want, or feel free to also just not listen to this episode because you're not in the right place. So I just wanted to put that warning there before we dive into it. So this episode, it's based on the chapter, so in Untamed, this magical book by Glennon Doyle, which speaks to me on a soul level and I come back to time and time again, which is why this whole podcast exists, You're a Goddamn Cheetah. And the chapter that we're going to be digging into today is called Talks. And as I was like flipping through and being like, right, what chapter am I going to talk about next? This one really hit home for me because I'm currently actually going through like the issues that it's kind of this chapter is really talking about, basically. And as I like promised at the start of this podcast, is that I really just want to be so honest and vulnerable in the hope that it will resonate with someone out there and maybe help them to gain an awareness on something, or just encourage them to lean deeper into these like shadowy parts, essentially. So this is a chapter we're going to be talking about. So it's a really brief one, actually. It's literally only a couple pages long, this one. But the story really around this chapter Talks is it's Glennon basically talking about a time when she was in a shop, like looking at magazines, basically with her daughter Tish, who at the time was 9. And Tish, her daughter, basically was stood in front of a load of magazines of all of these, skinny, blonde, how the typical kind of magazine cover, like the desirable, I'm doing this in like quotation marks, that desirable figure, she's like staring at them. And Glennon basically describes that her first reaction is to distract her and like hurry her along from looking at these magazines, basically. But in that moment, she decides not to do that and to actually lean into that, because she realizes that these messages, these magazines, this messaging is actually everywhere, and she can't protect her daughter from it. So she decides in that moment, how does she describe it? She says, either we leave our kids alone to make sense of them, or we wade in with them. So she basically in that moment decided to actually like, oh God, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. Let's get into it. And she basically asked Tish, like, what are these magazines? What are these like pictures of these women? What story are they telling you? And Tish basically says, like, I guess that women are very skinny, blonde, they have pale skin, they wear a lot of makeup, wear high heels, like barely any clothes. Basically, what most magazine covers, I guess, would have been like. I think there has been a lot of change, but like back at the time, because obviously this is when Tish was 9, like a lot of the magazine covers were like that. And Glennon kind of basically questions her and just asks her, okay, so that's what that magazine cover is telling you. Now, can we like look around the store, and what are the kind of women that are surrounding you right now? And then she just goes on and describes all of the incredibly like diverse women that are around her, of all shapes and sizes and ethnicities and cultures, like all around her. And basically says, like, this isn't an accurate representation of what women are. Like, look around you, basically. And it basically inspires Tish to go off and do this petition, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful part of the chapter. But I guess the thing I wanted to talk about first really is, and what it kind of was speaking to me like as I was reading this chapter, and I think is coming up a lot for me at the moment, is actually really thinking about like me growing up like as a teenage girl, like what were the kind of things that I was subjected to in terms of like what I thought, like the magazines and the culture at the time about what it meant to be a woman and how you should look and like behave. Because so I'm 38 now, so I was like growing up in the 90s, and like the magazines, and actually when I was a teenager it was like actually early 2000s, and it was like the Wild West in terms of like what all the magazines and what they were depicting at the time. So I have really clear memories of like top 100 like beach bodies, and like these poor women with like circles round different parts of their body, like highlighting things. And then I think me as a teenager being like, oh God, but I've got like, God forbid, I've got a bit of like cellulite, or my legs don't look like that. It was always like pitting women against each other. Like these are like the best beach bodies, and these are like the worst, and constantly comparing. And that was just constant. I remember that so clearly, and I was really reflecting on this, thinking, oh my God, that would have had, and it has had, such a massive effect on how I look and how I value my own, like my body, and like my self-esteem around my like body image. And actually I was even just like looking at it, like obviously scrolling on Instagram, and it said something about like the reason why a lot of us have such a kind of a fucked up like body image. Like there was this picture of, I don't know if you remember, if any of you watched Newlyweds with Jessica Simpson, but there was a time where there was this time where everyone thought Jessica Simpson was massively overweight, and she absolutely categorically, there we go, I said it, was not overweight. But like they kept doing these like before and after pictures of her, and like that at the time was like, oh my gosh, she's really let herself go. Like this whole like narrative was constantly like drip fed to us constantly through magazines. Like this was also the time when like MTV, like all the music videos and everything, it was just constantly being fired at us. And I do think it's had a massive effect on how I view my own body, and has really really affected like my body image, I think. And from the ages of let me think about this, like in my early 20s basically, I was bulimic, and which is, I have to say, being able to just actually say that is wild, because there was a real time when I felt such shame about owning the fact that I had an eating disorder. And now I'm a bit like, that was just something that happened and I need to share it. So I just need to acknowledge that in the moment. But yeah, and it really, I feel like it was, there were many reasons. There were many other reasons, which I'm sure I'll share as we go along this journey, around being bulimic, because there is such a sense of control element of it, or there certainly was for me. So there was other elements that were tying into it, but I do remember this feeling of like, I need to look a certain way. I'm not small enough. I need to shrink down. I need to get into this this image of like having no belly fat and like really slender thighs and no cellulite, like all of like this perfection that just doesn't exist. And I know that logically But it's still to this day that kind of these messages that I had kind of absorbed and had been given to me through like the culture and society are still with me today, because I am now on this journey of really starting to actually love my body and accept my body like how it is. And I didn't even really realize that I had such a kind of a blockage, like a disconnect there, until really a couple of months ago. It's funny actually, like, because I obviously talk about really tuning into your like inner voice, to that knowing, and there have been so many other things like bubbling up that I have been listening to, but the body one has always been a little bit of a niggle of like, are you going to look at any of this? Are you going to address any of these things, feelings? And I'd be like, nope, not quite ready to deal with you yet. And it's kind of come to the surface. So that's what I'm like working on, and just being able to like explore that and kind of come to a place of actually really loving and appreciating my body as it is. And it feels really daunting at the moment. And I think it feels quite important to chat about now, especially just because we are in those summer months when our like body is more on display, and like some of us might have holidays coming up or have just been on holiday, and there's the whole thing around being, you know, I'm doing this in quotation marks, summer body ready, all of that malarkey, and it just feels like a lot. So it's not really like I have a ton of answers or like solutions in terms of how to navigate that, because I'm navigating it myself. But I almost feel like even just getting an awareness of how we're really truly feeling in our bodies, and if there is a disconnect, and maybe just starting to explore in baby steps whenever it kind of feels safe to do so, of why that might be. Because this chapter really spoke to me, and it really like made me remember how I was feeling like in those like early 2000s, constantly looking at those magazines, flipping through all the bloody top 100 beach bodies and who's got the best this and the best that, and just all those horrible like circles around people's like body parts, and pointing out, you know, it's just wrong. And that is what we were subject to like over and over again. Like it was really prevalent during that time. And and then the bit in the can't get my words out, the bit in the chapter that I love so much at the end is how we can, you know, Glennon felt really, initially Glennon just wanted to protect her daughter from those magazines and not have that conversation. But actually she realized in that moment that actually she had to, like, as she says, wade in and kind of get into that conversation with her and basically teach her. And she was saying like, this is like our jobs, because it was really bad at that time when I was like in those early 2000s, but it still is around. And like our job really is to help them, help our kids, or even help ourselves actually. Like, let's be the critics of this culture. Let's kind of really like call it out when we see it, and instead of being like blind consumers to it. So instead of just absorbing all of it in, which is 100% what I was back then, can I now be like a critic to it and actually call it out? And actually, when my daughters like come up against these images of like perfection, again in quotation marks, of what it is to be like, have a perfect body, to look a certain way, can we call it out and have those conversations? And she says here, I can train my children to detect those lies and get angry instead of swallowing them and getting sick. And I think that's the line that I underlined, because I think that's the one that like really hit home, because that was me. I was swallowing all of that information, all of these messages, these subliminal messages that were showing to me in these magazines and these TV programs. And actually it's making me think of, do you remember when they released Bridget Jones' Diary, and there was like this whole hoo-ha around her weight, and she was only like, I can't remember the exact number, she was like 9 stone something, and that was kind of like said to, like, that was portrayed as being overweight. Like, what the actual fuck? And this was all going in here, just like I was swallowing all of this information as like correct, and it made me sick. There is that 100% was one of the reasons why I developed that eating disorder, why I was bulimic for so many years. That is 100% one of those reasons why. And what she's kind of saying to, and what really spoke to me in this, is that let's help our children detect those lies, and actually, instead of trying to distract or kind of like lean away from those conversations, can we actually like have them and kind of call it out, basically? And then the last bit, which I love so much, is that she talks about 12-year-old me, like literally standing in front of the magazine. So this is 12-year-old Glennon, and how she's like feeling about these magazines is, that's the truth about women, I will match it. And then 12-year-old Tish, who is her daughter, looking at those same magazines, is, that's a lie about women, I will challenge it. And that made me so emotional, because I didn't have the tools at the time to challenge it, to kind of call it out. And now I do. And I feel like I can be more equipped to kind of have these conversations with my daughters, like as and when they come up. But also, even if you don't have children and you're not in that space right now where you're going to be having these conversations, can you actually just yourself call it out? And when you start to feel yourself getting caught up in all of this summer body ready nonsense, can you call it out and challenge it? Can you challenge it? That is my question for you today, because that's something that I'm definitely continually trying to work on. And like I said, I still am navigating my way through this kind of self-love, working on loving my body the way it is. So I don't have all the answers, but I'm so curious about it. And I feel like even just getting an awareness to how you might be feeling in your body right now, and thinking about what messages that you would have received and absorbed, and you perhaps didn't have the tools to challenge it and to call it out and to detect it as a lie. Get curious about that and just start leaning into that if it feels like aligned and safe to do so. And I'll definitely be talking about this more as like I navigate my way through this. But yeah, that's what I wanted to share today. And I hope wherever you are having a wonderful day or evening. I just love, I'm so grateful you're here. I'm so grateful you're listening. And come follow me on Scorpio Moon Coach over on Instagram. And I will speak to you next week.